Hello, hello. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here, for joining us. We're about to get started. So yeah, make yourself comfortable, grab a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, whatever you need to sit through the next 30, 40 minutes or so. We're scheduled for about an hour, but I think we're going to compress it a little bit and not take up too much of your time, because really the whole point of what we're going to be talking about today is saving time and how you can share those benefits across your team. Before we dive in, a little bit about me and who I am and why you should care about what we've got to say. My name is Jake. I run a firm called Engineered GTM, and we build revenue infrastructure for B2B teams, and the majority of whom have kind of, up until the point that they engage us, kind of have duct taped things together and kind of got by and done just about enough to do what they need to do, but then realize that essentially there's a lot more that they could be kind of getting. And so most teams never quite manage to get that right, but the ones that do, there's kind of a new problem that's really emerging, and that's what we're going to cover today. And that's how do you actually share that knowledge and that information across your team so that all of your sellers, all of your SDRs, account executives, your customer success team, anybody who's in a revenue function inside of your organization can start to use all of these tools without having to learn them in the first place. And before we kind of get into anything, the session today is not going to be death by PowerPoint, you'll be pleased to know. So we don't have that many kind of slides to run through or lots of information to throw at you in that way. And it's really not kind of a theory talk. Really, we're just going to be showing a demo. So what are these tools? What is Functions in Clay? And what is the Clay MCP all about? How does it work? How does it look? And how you can use it. And so the idea is that then you can kind of take this information away, and as soon as this evening or tomorrow, you can kind of plug it in and start using it with your team straight away. So with that being said, we're doing stuff live. We're testing things live. So if it breaks, you're going to see it break. If it works, then you're going to see it work with me. And that's what this is really all about. So most of you in the room probably are already using Clay, but you know what it can do, and you have probably built some workflows, you've built tables, you've run enrichments. But the problem is that the number of people on your team that actually know how to use Clay is probably numbered. It's probably you, it's maybe 2-3 people, absolute maximum if you're in a bigger revenue organization. It's probably not your BDRs, your SDRs, your account executives. It's much more likely to be a go-to-market engineer if you have one of those, but otherwise, marketing ops, sales ops, go-to-market ops, etc. Now, that's kind of one person. That means the rest of the team is then kind of locked out. And of course, there's ways around that. You can build workflows, you can build CRM enrichment flows, but very often what we see is that one person becomes the bottleneck of all of this knowledge. And really what they want to be able to do is enable the rest of the team. And that's what we're going to have a look at today. So your best workflows currently are locked behind that one kind of person's Clay login. And that person then becomes that bottleneck for the entire team. And every rep then kind of ends up doing their own version of account qualification. So they've got their own process for the information that they find, the data points that they use. Maybe if you've got a bit of a Franken stack, they're maybe even pulling data from different providers. So one rep is using Apollo, another one is using Zoom Info, and that really is then kind of contaminating that whole scoring qualification process. So how do you know from one rep to another that that's actually happening in the same way across the board? Probably at the moment you don't, but chances are you want to, because you probably have a good idea of what that qualification process should look like. If you're using Clay especially, then you probably already know the data points that you need to capture for every single one of those accounts that comes through into your pipeline so that you can then process them and understand where they fit. But with every rep kind of doing their own version of that, the downstream impact of that is, of course, inconsistency across the team. That means inconsistent data going into the CRM, inconsistency across how reps are working their territories and their accounts. And, ultimately somebody kind of comes along and says, AI is going to fix all of this. They show you a chatbot. But again, chatbot, if every rep's using their own version of ChatGPT or Claude and they've got things set up in a slightly different way, that really creates the same problems. So that's not quite what this is. What I want you to kind of walk away believing today is that your ops team can build the workflows once inside of Clay, and then every single rep on your team can use it through a chat window. So they don't need to be a Clay expert. They don't actually even really need to know what Clay is, what it does. All they need to do is be able to have a conversation with Claude or ChatGPT. And I think, and if I was a betting man, then I would definitely put a lot of money on the fact that all of your sellers will at least be able to do that, and probably are already doing so. And so, we've built these systems for kind of venture-backed, equity-backed companies across B2B. And what we're kind of showing you today is versions of how this looks when they plug these kind of systems into their team. So this kind of all started with a really specific frustration, and then we'll get into, you know, what is MCP, what is the Clay MCP, and how does this all kind of tie back into functions and how you can start using this with your team. But what kind of got us to this point, and I think really why Clay have landed on launching their MCP, launching functionality like functions to kind of allow you to codify these workflows, is because, you know, of stories like the one that I'll share with you now. And we had a client who we'll call Dave. And, you know, Dave worked for a great company. They'd raised the Series B, really kind of strong growth profile. And their ops person had built really kind of these incredible Clay workflows ultimately that were powering a lot of the activity across the organization. You know, the output was really strong. A lot of it was automated, which was fantastic. But the problem that they found was, as wonderful as that kind of automation and all of those systems were, as they grew the team and as they added more sellers and increased that headcount, there was more kind of edge cases every single day that kept cropping up. There was more kind of need for ad hoc use cases from the sales team for different use cases. And so essentially this person became, you know, somebody who was just monitoring tickets from the sales team. Can you run this? Can you run that? And they were just kind of rinsing and repeating that multiple times a day. And that one person would have to go into Clay, build a workflow. You know, the sales team would have to kind of drop them a CSV, send that over to them, ask them to process it, and then wait to get it back. And that's what Clay's MCP kind of compresses now into a conversation between the sales rep and ChatGPT or Claude. So it kind of removes that whole process. So what is kind of MCP? Let's dive into that before we jump into the Clay MCP specifically. So MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And I don't want to teach you how to suck eggs. Probably the majority of people in here already know about MCP, but just in case you don't, think of it as almost like a USB-C for AI applications. So, you know, in the same way that you can charge your phone and your laptop and your power bank and all of your different devices just using your USB-C, that's almost kind of what MCP is for AI applications. So it's a way that lets the tools that you already use communicate with your AI tool, such as Claude, such as ChatGPT. So before MCP came along, every single kind of app would need a custom connector, or you would need to essentially know the exact API endpoint that you would need to use. And so again, for Clay users, you'll be very familiar with setting up things like HTTP APIs. If you want to update a property in HubSpot, if you want to add a lead to a campaign in Smart Lead, whatever it might be. And so MCP is essentially a way of allowing Claude or ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using to be able to do that kind of work for you, but without you having to specify the exact kind of API endpoints and connections that it needs to follow. It's going to be able to work out that path. So you're going to see a kind of system working live. So we're going to use the Clay MCP, and before we dive into kind of functions and skills and everything else, we're just going to run an example of how the Clay MCP actually works inside of a Claude chat window. So again, if we imagine that we're a sales rep and we're going to open up our Claude and essentially act like we have some qualification work to do. So what we're going to do is enrich deal.com, deal as in the SaaS company deal. And this round is really here to kind of prove that MCP works. It's something that you can kind of do today, tomorrow, immediately, and it's super, super easy to set up. So what we're going to start off with is a kind of completely blank Claude chat. And we're going to open up that Claude chat. And inside of here, there's kind of nothing preloaded. I don't have, a Clay table that's kind of set up in the back end. And what I do have, however, is the Clay MCP configured inside of Claude. So this is something that's totally native. Claude, ChatGPT essentially have almost like these app stores that you can, take a look into and find tools like Clay, Gmail, HubSpot, whatever it might be. And so again, your sales reps, your team, they don't even really need to know what Clay is. They just need to know that one time, when they're doing the initial setup, they should connect Claude to Clay. And what we're going to do is have a look how this MCP works. So we're going to tap in here and we're going to find out, we're going to say enrichdeal.com and return the information back to me in this chat. And what this is going to do is fire up some research using Clay's MCP. And this is almost like the most basic version of what we're going to show you today. So this is kind of, you can think about this as step one, or the kind of beginner way to start using this. But you can see Claude is kind of thinking, and it's going to do its thing. What you're going to see happen is that Claude will ask permission to use the Clay tool, but here we've kind of already allowed it to be able to do that. So you can see that it's spinning up this Clay widget here. Now, what's kind of happening behind the scenes is Clay is then able to work out via the MCP what tools it needs to use, and tools as in the things that are available, the features inside of Clay ultimately, that it needs to use to be able to fulfill this request. And so as you can see, it's returned to us a profile of Deal. We've got the logo, we've got their domain, the location, the number of employees, and an overview of the company. And if we scroll down in the chart, we have all of that information kind of returned to us exactly as we asked for. So, you know, there it is. It's kind of that simple for a rep to be able to start using this immediately to get, you know, trusted, reliable, and accurate information. Now, again, most reps are probably already using ChatGPT, Claude every single day to prospect. And, you know, if they were to go away and ask all of these questions individually, then ultimately you lose that element of control. Because you don't necessarily know, without Claude being connected to a tool like Clay, where it's going to go away to find that information about the industry type, about the headcount, about the annual revenue. And that might be fine, but then again, the problems kind of appear downstream. You know, what then happens when a rep wants to import that information into your CRM, and because they've used a different enrichment tool, or Claude has returned the data in a slightly different way, it breaks because it doesn't actually integrate back into your CRM, because maybe the property isn't quite formatted in the right way, or it's unexpected. And so that's what this kind of completely removes. If every rep is able to connect into the Clay MCP, they're able to just straight away start to ask these kinds of questions about the companies that they care about, as and when they're kind of prospecting, without having to have lots of different tabs open. I could literally just be on LinkedIn. I could see an interesting post from Deal that might make me think I want to reach out to them. And I can go ahead, tap in enrichdeal.com, and there I go. I've got everything that I need. So kind of one prompt, you saw how quick you know, that took. No having to build a Clay table, no having to kind of mess around with the Clay user interface and learn what enrichments to use, anything like that. Literally just tap into Claude, enrichdeal.com, send me the information back. 30 seconds later, I've got absolutely everything that I need. So that's kind of the MCP layer. That's that initial connection. And what we're going to do now is kind of show you how you can couple this with another feature that Clay shipped recently called Functions. We're kind of super excited about this because Functions is essentially a way that lets you codify your workflows into repeatable kind of composable elements that you can plug into, you know, another table here, another table there for a different use case. And so you can couple this up with something like the Clay MCP. And in this example, we're going to show you how you can kind of use this for account scoring. So again, something that reps will probably be always thinking about day to day is, how do we actually prioritize and score this account, especially if they're prospecting, even if they're not kind of, you know, net new business focused. It could be that they're looking through their current book of business and trying to work out which ones are the kind of top, you know, fits in terms of account score, in terms of how likely they might be to buy our product, that kind of propensity and fit scoring. But again, you know, if we have reps doing this manually, if we have reps doing this in lots of different ways, that creates issues downstream. And so what we can instead do is create a function in Clay. And inside of that Clay function, all of that really important knowledge about how we in our business actually qualify and score accounts can be compressed into a single function. What that means is I can then build any table or workflow that I want. It could be an inbound qualification flow. And then rather than having to build out that entire process again with, you know, all of the enrichments that I need and the qualification and the scoring criteria, instead of that, I can just drop in my ICP scoring and qualification function. So again, it's kind of build it once and deploy it lots of times in lots of different places. And so on the screen at the minute, we have one of these functions set up. And when you kind of pop it open and expand the function, really it just looks like a clay table. And so again, the beauty of this is that over time, if you decide that you need to add things in, tweak things, take things out, maybe change the way that your formulae is set up to weight scores slightly differently, market shift and ICP scoring can change slightly over time. So rather than, again, then having to go into every single clay table that uses this ICP qualification and scoring, you edit the function once, and then that change carries through and propagates across all of your other clay workflows. So again, if we now kind of think that, we know a company like Deal exists, we've got some of that basic information. At the minute, it's kind of cool. It's a little bit of a gimmick that we can get it straight from Claude, but ultimately everybody else that has an Apollo subscription also has all that information about a company like Deal. So the real question for a rep is, once I've got this information, do I actually then need to spend time on it or not? Is it really kind of not worth my time? And in most organizations, those kind of decisions live in people's heads. So reps are onboarded, they're taken through training, and they build up this picture in their mind of how to qualify, how to score these accounts. Some organizations have already got a scoring model, and those folks, that kind of varies in terms of adoption, how much reps will trust it and how much reps will kind of use it. But again, being able to kind of codify that and have everybody singing from the same hymn sheet is really powerful. So we've built this function that's an account fit scorer, and essentially it's a 7-step pipeline. So it takes a company domain, it runs it through multiple enrichments and AI checks, and then it returns a verdict whether the company is a fit, a partial fit, or not a fit at all. And so again, as a sales rep for me, that means that rather than just returning those basic enrichments, I now also have my next step. Do I actually prioritize this company? Do I kind of, not exclude them, but also equally not prioritize them immediately? Or are they a bad fit and I can kind of bin them and move on with my prospecting? And the really important thing is that, again, this means that that criteria can be defined globally once. So your senior leadership, your CMO, your CRO, your CSO, your revenue senior leaders can sit down with your marketing ops, your go-to-market ops, and you can kind of, really hash this out and get it built in a way that works for you and your revenue organization. And then everybody across the org is going to have access to this. And so when Johnny in Dave's team scores an account, you're going to know that that's scored in exactly the same way as Ben in Bob's team scored an account when they were doing their research. So for a rep, what this means is, again, when they're working and prospecting and thinking about scoring accounts, what this becomes is, again, a conversation with Claude. So this time, rather than just saying score Deal against enrich Deal, I'm going to actually ask it to score Deal against my ICP. And we can have a look at how this works inside of Claude now. So inside of Clay, as I showed you before, we already have this function that's kind of pre-built. So we have this account fit scoring function pre-built inside of Clay. And now, again, we can imagine that we're a salesperson who is needing to score this account. And again, rather than me having to know how to use Clay, rather than me needing to worry as a seller about which exact data points I need to use and how to kind of calculate that scoring, all I need to do is use Claude and the Clay MCP or ChatGPT and the Clay MCP, and I can push this information straight through into that function that my ops team has already built. And again, that function is going to contain the knowledge of potentially my CMO, my CRO, the executive team, the frontline salespeople. You can really spend a lot of time building them out and getting them right, because once you've built them, the effect is compounding across the entire revenue organization. So here, what we can actually see kind of happening this time is a little bit different to the previous flow. So in this case, what's happening behind the scenes is Clay is, first of all, enriching the company. And then we are running that scoring function. So inside of the scoring function, we're pulling specific data that we need to be able to score, and we have some formulae that are pre-built. And as soon as we kind of mention that trigger, that keyword, account fit scoring, or whatever it might be, the MCP knows it's going to send it to the right function, and then we start to get our results back. So those steps all run inside of that single Clay function, and all the reps have to do is, again, ask for that to happen inside of Claude. So because this can take a little bit of time, it might, we might have to ask Claude to just kind of poll to get that response, as we're doing again now. So Clay is probably at this point still working in the background, going through the steps of that function to kind of score and qualify the account and work out what output to give us. And maybe we can actually have a look, as this is running, at how Clay looks in the background, and we can see the function table running and going through these kind of steps here. So in the table here, this is our kind of functions table, and this is all of the enrichments that we have set up. So again, this is the piece of work that can be codified. You as an organization can decide, every time we need to qualify or score an account, what is it that we need to know? What are those data points that we need? And so in here, we have things, of course, like enriching the company. And as we scroll through the table, we run some additional enrichments too, to get information on things like their funding. We use some Clagent columns to be able to understand if they're a SaaS company or not, so on and so forth. And so this is an example of what a qualification process could look like. But of course, again, really what this is showing is that you can configure this in exactly the way that you need to. And then finally, right at the end, what we get is we send that data back into the Claude chat so that the rep knows on the other end, is this account a good fit? And what should I kind of do with it? And they haven't had to think about any of those steps in the middle. All they've had to worry about is doing their job, prospecting, and having a chat with Claude or ChatGPT. So if we head back into the Claude window, we're going to be able to see the verdict that's returned. And again, there was 3 possible verdicts that could have been returned. So we have it set up so that it can return a kind of complete fit, a partial fit, or not a fit at all. And so again, in the background, what's happened is Clay has gone through that functions table that we've just shown you. Because of the way that we have it configured with those enrichments and the scoring setup, the final output is that this is a partial fit account, and the rep almost immediately knows that. So this whole process has taken less than a couple of minutes. And all I've had to do again as a sales rep is have a conversation with Claude. Equally, this could be with ChatGPT as well. And I've got my company's scoring logic, qualification logic completely baked into the back end. So again, consistency, and everybody across the team is going to be doing this in exactly the same way. So someone who's never actually kind of really considered the scoring logic, they've never opened the Clay table, they've probably never even seen that function and how it actually works, and how the data runs through the Clay table. They don't need to. They don't need to, and that's the beauty of this. There's no kind of individual judgment calls really that are needed, because you're removing that inconsistency. And so essentially every time a sales manager or the VP of sales or your marketing director asks, hey, why are we actually spending time on this account again? The answer's there in writing, and it's backed by data. So if you think about your kind of pipeline at the minute, then you've probably got a bunch of accounts that haven't been scored in a while, haven't been scored in quite some time. And imagine if every single rep in your team could actually score those through the same function before they even spend a minute on it. That would unlock immediately, next Monday, tomorrow, a list of top fit, prioritized accounts ready for them to go after and work through. And that kind of leads us on nicely to the last kind of step of this, and this is ultimately the kind of advanced level. So we've had a look at what MCP is, we've had a look at what functions is, and now we're going to look at how you can kind of tie essentially the 2 things together inside of a skill. And again, you might already know and be familiar with skills and be using them, but just in case, we'll have a little look at what a skill is, what the kind of difference is between using it versus just using something like an MCP, and why you might want to do it. So first of all, a skill is essentially an instruction file that your AI agent, so Claude or ChatGPT, can pull off of the shelf when it's relevant. So you can think about all of your skills that you might build up as a library, and inside of the library there are books. And the beauty of this is that every single one of those books has a very short description. And in that short description, almost like a blurb, right? So like a blurb of a book. On the back cover of the book, you have a short description, and that tells you the story or the contents of the book, a little bit maybe about the author, and essentially what you can expect to get if you read that book. What are you going to learn? What are you going to read about? All of that kind of stuff. And that's really how skills work. So a skill is this file that at the very top contains a description. And anytime you work with your Claude or your ChatGPT, it has access to those descriptions. And because they're very short, what that means is it's almost like your GPT or Claude is able to just kind of in the corner of its eye be able to see the library bookshelf. So if it needs to, it can quickly scan through all of those different blurbs and be able to retrieve the book and open it up and see all of the contents inside of the book and read the entirety of the book. So that's why skills are great, because of course context management is really, really important when you're working with AI tools. And anybody that's worked with AI for any time will know that the further that you get into your session, or if you go kind of above, let's say 50% of the kind of context window, then your output starts to degrade. You start to get slightly worse answers. The AI becomes a little bit lazy and starts to take shortcuts. And so essentially you always want to be making sure that you're kind of managing context. Now, separately, the other benefit of skills is that you are able to kind of codify those instructions. And so if you always run something in the same way, then you're able to say, hey, every time I do this thing, X, Y, and Z always needs to happen. And it always needs to happen in this order, 1, 2, and 3. And that's what a skill is really great for kind of codifying those repetitive processes. Now, for the context management piece, this is where this idea of progressive disclosure comes in. So skills load in 3 stages. So the kind of first stage, as I say, is really that kind of the description, right? And the name, that metadata about the skill, that blurb on the library bookshelf. And then only when it becomes relevant is the rest of the skill actually loaded. So the instructions, the resources, any references, etc. What that means is that essentially Claude or GPT is only opening and reading the books in the library that it needs to when it actually needs to. So let's say, for example, you ask your Claude a question about history. If you're using a skill, it essentially inside of its context window, it has all of the blurbs of the books in your library. And so it can quickly decide, okay, all of the science books, not relevant. All of the technology books, not relevant. And it can focus on the history books, decide to pull them off of the shelf, open them up and read them, get the context that it needs, and deliver you an answer. Now that's different to how MCP works. So if you are using MCP, that's essentially like having the whole book always in your context window right from the beginning of the session. And so, if you only have a couple of these connected, then that's not so much of a problem. But when you start to add multiple MCPs especially, it can become a problem, because every single session that you start, if you imagine that you might have 10 MCP connectors, then before you've even typed a single word to Claude or to ChatGPT, your context is already hugely bloated with all of this MCP context and tools and information. Now, you might just want to ask for a document review. You might just want to ask ChatGPT or Claude to proofread an email that you've written. So why does it make sense to have its context essentially polluted with all of these unnecessary tools? And that's where kind of skills come in, because you can wrap an MCP inside of a skill. And so that's what we're going to kind of show you now. And what we've done is created a skill that does exactly that. So a function lives in Clay. and does the work in the back end. A skill is something that lives in Claude or in ChatGPT. And again, the idea is that it can be written kind of once, it can be deployed, it can be used by everybody. And over time, if it needs to be tweaked and changed, you can do so. So what the skill does is it's going to go one step further. And so remember that I said that skills are really useful if you have a process that you always need to follow in a particular order. Every single time you want X, Y, and Z to happen, and you always want it to be in the order of 1, 2, and 3. Now, we've shown you some kind of more basic examples of using the Clay MCP, but let's say, for example, that in your organization, you have decided that when your sales reps are prospecting, if any of the accounts that they're prospecting are a partial fit or a confirmed good fit, you automatically want to find contacts, relevant contacts in those accounts. Again, chances are you have a very specific profile when it comes to who those contacts are, the titles, the persona, everything that kind of comes into to building up that profile of who your buyers are. So again, you can codify that. So we can build functions. We can build a function that not only qualifies and scores our accounts, but we can also build a function that helps us find the right people. And again, everybody in my team can have access to that function. And so if we wanted to use that with the MCP, great. We might be able to say, hey, I want to find some people at X, Y, and Z. So can you use the function find people to help me find those people? A little bit of a mouthful. Chances are, reps might not actually remember all of that. And it's about us making it as easy as possible for them. So where a skill comes in is you can essentially have it triggered on whatever keyword or whatever kind of trigger phrase you want. So it might be something as simple as a rep just saying, enrich this account or score this account. And then when that happens, your entire skill can be loaded in and Claude or ChatGPT is going to follow that process. And in this process, we've configured our skill so that if the account is a partial fit or a good fit, we're going to get that information returned back to us so we know, but then Clay's going to go one step further and we're going to use one of the functions that we've pre-built inside of Clay, and it's configured with all of the right filters and job titles, etc., to also then find the top people in that account that we should contact. And so if we have a look at that, then what we can see is Claude doing exactly this job. And so what we have now is, because this account was a partial fit, that's met the criteria for being allowed to go and find people. And now we've found the top 8 people in this account that we should contact. And again, that's what we've specified in our skill, but you could specify, go and find me the top 3 people, go and find me the top 50 people. Really, the point is that you can configure this once and deploy it globally across your organization for all of your reps and team to use. So the idea is that if I, as a rep, opened a brand new kind of Claude chat window and just said something as simple as scoredeal.com, my entire skill can run. This whole process end to end that you've seen today can run top to bottom, and it's going to be wrapped inside of that skill. And as a sales rep, I don't have to learn Clay, the biggest thing. I also don't have to remember which particular phrases to use and how exactly to talk to Claude or to ChatGPT to get it to do the thing that I want to do. Instead, what I can do is just speak how I usually speak. I can say, score these accounts, enrich these accounts for me, find me contacts. And because we've got our functions and the MCP wrapped in skills that have that context and know the order and the patterns to follow, it's always going to return the same kind of quality. It's going to follow that same process every single time. And so although it's, AI is ultimately probabilistic, it's getting it as close to deterministic as possible, in that it's always going to be following that process, and you can enforce the process that it follows. So, what this also means, of course, is that you're not wasting credits and spend essentially on finding data for people that are irrelevant. And so, what you can see that we've actually returned for these contacts is not just their title and their LinkedIn URL or anything like that, but we've also got kind of their work email. So, we've also got a score in terms of how closely they match the persona that we're actually looking for. And so again, we've kind of configured that in the function in the back end so that only the accounts that are a good fit or a partial fit will actually go through this process to get the people found, so that we're actually only spending money on enriching, getting contact details for folks who work in those good or partial fit accounts. And again, as a sales rep, I have not had to think about this whatsoever. I don't have to think about, before I send these leads to an enrichment tool, I've got to filter them out, I've got to manually go through and delete any that aren't really a good fit, etc. If they work at an account and they've slipped through, all I've got to do is have a conversation with Claude or with ChatGPT, and this is going to happen for me. So what we're doing is passing essentially every single person into a function which scores them. They get a score from 0 to 100. That's weighted in a way that we've kind of set up in the back end. But what we now have is these 8 contacts. Also, we have for the top contacts where they actually reach our kind of criteria for being a really good fit on that persona score. We're also going to go one step further and find their email and get additional details about them. And what that really means is that in one prompt, a salesperson can type one prompt, the system is going to go away, research the company, score it against our ICP at an account level, find relevant decision makers or contacts that the sales team would need at that company, score each of those people, not just the account, but also score each of those people individually. And if they're a good score, then we're going to go and we're going to get the contact details that we need, like their work email, their mobile phone number, etc., in a predefined function that we have built inside of Clay. And the rep does not know, and they don't need to know how that scoring works. The rep doesn't need to know and probably doesn't care about which data provider is the most accurate for getting the email. They just want an email or a phone number that they can reach their prospect on. And all they have to do is have this conversation with Claude or with ChatGPT. That's really it. So what I kind of want you to sit with is and go away and think about is, if you had something like this plugged into your revenue organization at the minute, not as a demo, but as something that you actually kind of use every day, that your sellers can go in, log in every morning, and they can be having these conversations, doing this kind of work. What actually kind of changes for you? What does that mean? How much time does that really kind of unlock? What happens to your, GTM engineer or your ops person's week if they're not processing 10, 20 ad hoc random requests per week from the sales team who have all of these kind of ad hoc use cases? What happens to pipeline consistency when every single account is scored exactly the same way? What happens to ramp time when a new SDR who comes into the organization last week can score accounts exactly the same way and qualify accounts exactly the same way that an SDR that's been with you for 12 months does? And I think that's the power of being able to extend essentially the functionality of your go-to-market engineering function, your Clay function, to the entirety of your sales team through MCP, through skills, and through functions. And so you have just kind of seen that full pipeline of us chatting with our kind of host, Claude, pushing information through Clay's MCP server, and also using the skills that we've built inside of Claude to kind of ensure that we're following a specific process and doing things in a certain way. And that's also kind of 3 levels of kind of basic, intermediate, and advanced. The first level is just interacting with the MCP natively, just using it to get those basic enrichments. The second level is coupling that with a function. So you pre-build some functions in the back end in your Clay workspace, and then you're able to essentially give access to those functions to your team so that your team are able to call specific functions to get the data that they need. And then the most advanced step is wrapping that MCP and those functions inside of a skill or multiple skills so that reps can talk using natural human language, and the skill can trigger on things like score these accounts, find these contacts, and that it's always going to follow the exact same process. So we have actually kind of built systems, of course, like this for real companies and revenue teams. And I told you about our client, who I think I called Dave. They went from essentially processing all of these ad hoc requests to building kind of infrastructure, reusable infrastructure that the team can then really kind of tap into. And the reps themselves went from being able to research really only a handful of accounts manually each week, apart from the requests that they were making to their RevOps person, to the amount that they used to be able to do in a week, they're now able to do in 1 hour, because of the process and the system that they have built out to enable them to essentially tap into that knowledge. And every single seller across the team, every new SDR, every new account executive, everybody that comes in can plug into the exact same system. So the cost per qualified contact dropped, and the data quality actually went up because everybody was using the same system, and it applies that exact same criteria every single time. So it always happens the same way. So you've seen it kind of work, and you're probably saying, like, how do we kind of get this into our team? Fair enough. The honest answer is we run Clay Club North. So once a quarter, at least in Manchester, we meet up, we build this kind of stuff live. We hear what other people are doing, right? We have really interesting folks that join us. So marketers, salespeople, founders, investors, essentially all flavors of people from all across the go-to-market and revenue spectrum come along and join us. So if you want to kind of DIY this, do it yourself, then please do come along to our next event, and we'll have a little bit more details about that at the end. And of course, you might also be thinking, well, I actually need some help with this, and that's what we can help with too. Before we kind of close off, we have a question from Karis. So, can the data be created as leads and checked if it exists in Salesforce? And if not, if it does exist, can we upsert the data? So yes, absolutely. And this is something that you could essentially bake into that function. So, inside of your function, one of the very last steps could be performing that check, inside of Salesforce, looking up the lead by email or whatever it needs to be, and then doing exactly as you said. Yeah. So that can be something that you wouldn't even have to build into the skill. You could build on the Clay side into your function, and then every time that table fires, that function kind of fires, that check's going to happen before any data goes into your CRM. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so any other questions? We're kind of super happy to take. We are so thankful for your time. If you've joined us on LinkedIn, if you've joined us elsewhere, thank you so much for watching and for being here with us. We hope it was really useful. I'll just finish off, like I said, by kind of talking about what comes next. We have our Clay Club North events, and so we can drop a link to the next one, or we can kind of flick something up about the next one on the screen right now. We're really excited about the next event that we're hosting in Manchester on Wednesday, the 10th of June. It's going to be in the evening, kind of early evening time, from around 5:30, 6 o'clock. And this one is huge because the Clay crew is in town. So we have Munwar flying in from Berlin. We have Sia flying in from India. We have Owen flying in all the way from the US, all the way to Manchester to meet our Clay Club North community. So we're really, really excited. You've got Owen from the kind of social community team, Munwar from community, and Sia from the kind of Clay Club, Clay Cup team as well. All of them are fantastic people, super, super knowledgeable. They love to meet everybody who uses Clay, wants to use Clay. So please do come along. We're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to test out a slightly different format for the event with these guys as well, which we're really, really excited about. And then, of course, as I said, if you need a little bit of help with any of this stuff, then you are very welcome to contact me or contact Jess, my co-founder on LinkedIn, who has been very kindly doing all of the tech in the background, changing the screens, flicking things up when we've needed them, which I hope has looked smoothly so that I didn't have to worry about it. But if you need any help with this stuff, and either you can't make it to Clay Club North, or you just like, to compress the time that it's going to take to get all of this plugged in, let us know. We'll have a chat, and we can definitely help you out. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. We're gonna leave it there. And yeah, have a great rest of the day. I think we are just kind of finishing ahead of time. So yeah, we'll give you this time back to go and enjoy the last 10 minutes of the session on your own time. Thanks so much.